mig lite. Snälla Oskar. Bli mig lite.
Over the years, we've had a renaissance of supernatural horror movies at the box office. Most notably, there's been an increase in vampire-centric horror movies in the past few years, with the most prominent example being Sinner's time of recording. I enjoyed the movie a lot, but what really drew me in was the behavior of the movie's antagonist, Remick. Unlike the standard fare in general vampire movies, Remick is portrayed in a more sympathetic light, as there are brief moments in between the action sequences that showcase his ultimate goal, quelling the isolation that comes with being immortal. It isn't often that we get a look at this perspective of vampirism, but it was a welcome surprise, and it unlocked memories of two other vampire-themed properties that explore this aspect even further. Let the Right One In is a coming-of-age romantic horror movie that was released back in 2008 to critical acclaim. The film follows Oscar, a young boy being bullied by his classmates, and Ellie, a mysterious child that moves into the apartment next to Oscar's at the beginning of the movie. It wastes no time in showing you that Ellie is indeed a vampire, but surprisingly, the main story lies in the connection forged between this ageless being and the isolated young boy. Over the course of the movie, we witness as both Eli and Oscar slowly open up to each other and develop themselves more by extension. Oscar, being emboldened by Ellie, eventually defends himself against the bullies in his class, and Ellie, having fostered a connection with a human that goes beyond the roles of master and servant, shows Oscar her vulnerable side and the desolate reality of living with vampirism. Both of them experienced a type of loneliness that couldn't be understood by the common people around them, but once they found each other, the relatable experiences with said loneliness allowed them to bond and find happiness that would otherwise be unobtainable in normal circumstances. I feel that media properties that include a vampire twist tend to lean more into the action/eroticism surrounding vampire lore, but very few hone in on the isolation and loneliness that comes with the immortality granted by the affliction. Let the Right One In garnered such high praise precisely because it used those aspects as one of its core themes, and the subject of this video follows the same school of thought in regards to its subject matter. Happiness is a manga that released in 2015 by acclaimed mangaka Shuzo Oshimi. If you are an avid manga reader, the name might ring a bell. You may have come across his works in the past, most notably The Flowers of Evil, his most popular work, or Blood on the Tracks, one of his most recent releases. Oshimi has cemented himself as a leading voice among the modern lineup of mangaka thanks to his unorthodox storylines and, above all else, his trademark art style. Happiness is no exception to this. Being the third major work from the author following Flowers of Evil and Inside Mary, both really good reads by the way, we're treated to the culmination of his talents up to this point, with longtime fans able to discern just how much of the former works influenced the title we are looking at today. With this particular case though, both aspects are dialed up to 11, as we venture into more supernatural territory than anything Oshimi has produced up to this point. Just take a look at some of these splash pages. Oshimi has an innate ability to convey so much emotion through his art that many readers often comment about certain sections leaving a lasting impression on them. be it astonishment or disturbance. With that context for the author out of the way, now I can proceed with the plot of the story. Happiness follows a young boy by the name of Makoto Okazaki as he is attacked and turned into a vampire during one fateful night's encounter. As the process begins to take hold of him, the story also expands to the supporting characters around him and how they are also affected by the oncoming development. Although the argument can be made that the story is more focused on the action/horror elements of the vampire genre, I find that the true story underneath the surface is one that is much more emotional than what it initially presents itself as. This manga has been a favorite of mine for a few years now, but I was always confused about why exactly it was titled Happiness in the first place. Ironically, the answer came about during my own periods of isolation. Although we've been conditioned to desire a pointedly social life as the right way to attain happiness, a lot of personal growth and actualization can be found in solitude. Cultivating a close-knit circle of companions is crucial in developing personal happiness, and isolation itself shouldn't be considered a penance. Each of the major characters of the story embody this lesson to their core, and I want to take the time to expand upon them and demonstrate how this shift in perspective ultimately changed each of their lives. We start with our story's protagonist, Okazaki. From the very beginning, Okazaki is portrayed as being at the bottom of the social hierarchy, with the school's popular clique, led by Yuki, who we'll discuss later, taking advantage of Okazaki's selfless nature by making him the gopher, essentially the errand boy of the class. This has a deep negative effect on his own personal image even outside of school, but with the advent of Nora's attack, this would soon change rapidly. The physiological changes being brought on by vampirism have an effect on Okazaki not unlike going through puberty, which has a domino effect leading him to act impulsively against his main bully Yuki. And crossing paths with a girl that becomes his first real friend in the story. His encounter with Gosho is only the second time Okazaki is shown compassion in the story outside of interactions with his family, which came at a crucial moment when he was spiraling out of control. After this, Gosho becomes a central figure in Okazaki's life moving forward. Similar to him, she is more reserved than her peers, and she opens up enough to share her own private area of stillness with him, which leads to them forming a bond over the calmness of the isolation. Before this, Okazaki's only companion was Nunoda, the previous gopher and fair-weather friend who only sought to commiserate with Okazaki over their shared misfortune. Forming the connection with Gosho vastly improved Okazaki's self-esteem, to the point where Nunoda became envious of his friend's newfound growth. But there's another character in the background that is taking notice of this new uplifted attitude from our protagonist as well. On the opposite end, Yuki, the previous de facto leader of the popular clique, has been usurped from his position due to Okazaki's rash action, and now faces ostracization in the same manner that he subjected Okazaki to in the past. And he does not take it well. With his social value now non-existent, Yuki sinks into a catatonic depression until Okazaki emerges to rescue him from his own bullying incident by his former gang. The simple act of Okazaki standing up for him despite being his abuser in the past had a profound effect on Yuki, although he couldn't properly process it in that moment. What follows is a total shift in demeanor from abuser to ally, as Yuki now begins to go out of his way to show his appreciation for his newfound friend. Although he becomes heavy-handed in his attempts at befriending Okazaki and Gosho, we can see that his intentions are pure. Due to his upbringing, though, forming genuine bonds with others has never been his strong suit, due to the isolation he faced from his parents growing up. So this is wholly new territory for him. Yuki has bonded with Okazaki much in the same manner that Okazaki bonded with Gosho during their first encounter. to the degree that Yuki mobilized immediately once he learned that Okazaki had become the new target of harassment from his former gang. Yuki's concern for Okazaki's safety becomes his top priority, so much so that even after being tossed aside and left for dead by the vampire lurking in the scene, Yuki's first words after being saved by Okazaki are sighs of relief after learning that Okazaki himself was safe. For the relatively short time that we've spent with the character up to now, it's amazing to see the rapid growth of Yuki from being selfish to selfless as his true social circle shrank, and he began to concentrate on the individuals closest to him instead of the larger crowd behind him. Okazaki and Yuki retain these bonds after fully turning into vampires, with both of them becoming their most vulnerable when opening up to Gosho and Okazaki respectively. In Okazaki's case, Gosho was the only person he confides in about the recent changes that have taken over him, and he spends much of the finale silently watching over Gosho across the years to repay the kindness she showed him when he first began to turn. In Yuki's case, he viewed Okazaki as the only person in the world that could truly understand him. So naturally, Okazaki became a central figure in Yuki's hastily thrown together plan to run away from it all and start anew. Even after his capture and subsequent catatonic depression, Yuki reawakens once he realizes that Gosho is in true danger, and there's a high chance that Okazaki is as well. Both of them found their happiness in the form of the connections made within their solitary group. These two characters show us that it's not so much the quantity of acquaintances that one has, but the quality of the individuals closest to them that make all the difference. We spent some time making reference to Gosho in the previous section, but it cannot be understated how important she is to the overall plot, especially in the second half of the story where she becomes the protagonist. Gosho has been a peculiar case since her introduction, as she is the first character presented as being alone by choice. We come to find out later that part of this behavior stems from Gosho harboring guilt from the loss of her younger brother before the beginning of the story. We aren't given the exact circumstances, but through her conversations with her brother's spirit, we learn that she blames his death on her own inability to help during his time of need, which lends to her self-isolating as a form of penance. Opening up to Okazaki is no mere coincidence. It turns out that he resembles Gosho's late brother to an extreme degree, and part of her connection to Okazaki is fostered as a proxy to correct the mistake of her past this time around, even if Okazaki himself is unaware of the situation. Throughout the first half of the story, Gosho feels compelled to involve herself in Okazaki's life, and expressly states that his well-being is her business because of the likeness between him and her brother. But this level of altruism leads to tragedy, as the true villain of the story jumped at the chance to take advantage of the naive schoolgirl. As we reach the halfway point of the story, Gosho is now a fully grown adult, and she continues to be reserved and mysterious at her place of employment. She gains notoriety from her coworkers due to how rare it is for her to make an appearance at social functions outside of work. What they don't know is that Gosho at this point has compiled the guilt of losing Okazaki together with the previous guilt of losing her brother, which leads to her forming an exceptionally negative bias that she is undeserving of a normal life and undeserving of happiness overall. This spell begins to crack with the introduction of her coworker Pseudo. From the onset, Pseudo has been portrayed as having romantic interest in Gosho, although she doesn't reciprocate it. Pseudo goes out of his way to make himself available for Gosho at every turn, even in the midst of Gosho having a mental breakdown when past traumatic memories resurface while scanning a magazine rack. These actions eventually wear down the self-imposed restrictions Gosho upholds for herself, and in response, she becomes much more open around Pseudo. Gosho reaches a point where she becomes comfortable enough to accompany Pseudo on a day date without concealing the large scar on her neck, a show of trust that signifies a notable step in her healing process. It's during this date that Gosho and Pseudo have a chance encounter with Okazaki's mother. Okazaki's mother is one of the characters that has a smaller amount of panel time, but is a key figure of showcasing the moral of the story as a whole. Okazaki's family isn't given much time for development, but with the short moments that they are in frame, it's his mother and her reactions to the unfolding events that Oshimi gives special attention to. Okazaki's mother reacts to the news of Okazaki's attack like any parent would, and becomes hypervigilant for the remainder of the story, out of fear and protective instinct to keep her son safe. Similar to Gosho, the helplessness she experienced while her loved one was under duress had a profound negative effect on her well-being. She later confesses in the meeting with Gosho and Pseudo that she blamed herself for the perceived failure of losing Okazaki all those years ago. But in this monologue, Okazaki's mother meditates on the core theme of the story and how her life changed once she shifted her perspective about the situation. At a certain point, she realized that creating that penance of isolation was self-destructive, and that the only way forward was to live on with the trust that Okazaki's decisions were for his own benefit, and to not blame herself for the outcome. Both characters share the trait of turning their grief inwards towards themselves as a misguided attempt to atone for their past transgressions. In reality, they both attempted to punish themselves for circumstances that were outside of their control. Holding the belief that isolation from others was what they deserved did more harm than good, as both characters' development were locked in a feedback loop that could only be broken once a shift in perspective was obtained. For Gosho, the persistence of Pseudo during her time of need was enough to eventually wear down the wall that she had built around herself for so many years. For Okazaki's mother, the shift came gradually over the course of the 10-year time skip. She realized the kind of pain Gosho was putting herself through and implores her to not punish herself for the perceived failure of losing Okazaki and to live a full life while keeping the memory of those that she lost intact. Okazaki's mother came to the realization that denying yourself the happiness that comes with simple everyday living is no way to go about life, and passed that lesson on to Gosho to save her from the fate that she subjected herself to for all those years. A curious detail about happiness that I noticed on my second reread is just how little time we spend with the established vampires as opposed to the newly turned ones. There are only two previously turned vampires that are introduced in the story, Nora and Saku. Both characters are antagonists by definition, and they are shrouded in mystery for the majority of the storyline, but nevertheless contribute to the most impactful moments of the series as a whole. We're treated to glimpses of understanding as to who they are and how they function in this world through their interactions with Okazaki. We are first introduced to Nora in Chapter 1 as a catalyst to kick off the events of the story. She disappears just as abruptly as she arrives, not to be seen again until the crucial moment where she saves Okazaki from certain death. The reason why Nora targets Okazaki isn't fully explained at this point of the series, but from the brief intersection between herself, Okazaki, and the opposing vampire Saku, her actions are noted to be out of character from how she normally operates. Throughout her sparse appearances in the story, she demonstrates a keen interest in Okazaki that runs counterintuitive to her basic survival instincts as a vampire, and we learn as the story unfolds that her ultimate desire is to acquire him as a lifelong partner. She even agrees to alter the way that she hunts for blood as the sole condition of having Okazaki by her side, not at all concerned about the added difficulty leveled on their survival for doing so. It's revealed at the end of the story that, similar to Gosho's situation, Okazaki strongly resembles Nora's lover from her time as a human long ago, which led to Okazaki being the only person Nora hesitated to kill once she was done feasting on his blood. This moment of hesitation forever altered the course of their histories, mainly in Okazaki's case, but for Nora as well. She becomes fiercely protective of Okazaki, constantly watching from the shadows as he develops his vampire abilities and instinctively rushes in to save him from both perceived threats, in the case of the newly turned Yuki, as well as imminent ones, such as when the paramilitary discovered them at her rooftop dwelling. Okazaki later confesses that this connection that they share was the only thing keeping him grounded in the 10 years since they were captured and experimented on. Saku, on the other hand, is a direct counter to Nora's characterization. While she mainly operated passively in the background, Saku wasted no time springing to action in order to ensure that his solitude went undisturbed. At Okazaki's full turning, Saku demolishes the gang that was torturing Okazaki without hesitation, and sets his sights on the fledgling vampire in order to nip the future problem of his growth in the bud. Saku viewed Okazaki as a threat to his territory and by extension his solitude, so the only solution was removal until Nora intervened. Saku has no problem with eliminating any person that he comes across, because for countless years, he has maintained a solitary existence to sustain himself. Unfortunately for him, his plan backfired as he was suddenly attacked by Nora in order to rescue Okazaki, which led to his near death at the train tracks. This is notably the only time we see Saku express his emotions strongly, as he is in shock at the sudden betrayal from Nora. When Saku reappears after the time skip, he has undergone a noticeable change in demeanor. Okazaki understandably panics, but Saku assures him that he no longer seeks to kill him and is instead focused on working together to escape captivity once again. After rescuing what's left of Nora, Saku remarks that his interaction with Okazaki was enough to remind him of the humanity that he had lost centuries ago, and in turn, that revelation moved him enough to willingly sacrifice himself to ensure Okazaki's escape from the testing lab. He returns briefly during the epilogue with a fully formed body, having escaped the facility once more, and silently thanking Okazaki as he flies off into the night. Unlike the humans of the story, both vampires have existed in isolation as a means of survival. Such a lifestyle over the course of centuries undoubtedly left them jaded to their former lives as humans, and what it felt like to have connections to people outside of transactional experiences. This all changed when both Nora and Saku came into contact with Okazaki. Just as Saku mentioned, the encounter with the young boy reignited the memories of their time as human, and that sudden shift in perspective brought about a positive impact that reminded them of the happiness they had forgotten so long ago. Just as it happened in the story, coming across the right person could be all it takes to revitalize the often dormant memories of happiness within those that have existed in isolation for prolonged periods of time. There are definitely a lot of core plot points that I skipped over during this discussion of the manga, but to illustrate the thesis of the video, it felt necessary to hone in on the characters and their arcs as opposed to the overarching horror and psychological events that bookend the story. During my first read, I didn't fully resonate with the theme right away, mainly because I lacked the life experience to relate at the time. But the monologue from Okazaki's mother always stood out to me. Come some 5 years later, I've achieved a better understanding of how each of the characters' circumstances revolve around dealing with isolation and finding their own personal happiness through the ordeal. While there is some benefit to self-isolation in order to pursue personal happiness, it's easy to get lost in that framework of thinking, which is where the importance of having a close-knit circle demonstrates its value. It doesn't matter if society tells you that the more people in your corner, the better. There's always a way to attain personal happiness on the path of self-actualization.